My name is Dr.Lipman. I'm the founder and medical director of the Atlanta Fibroid Center. I've been practicing medicine here in Atlanta for the past 31 years, but our practice is primarily focused on the non-surgical treatment of uterine fibroids.
Yes, and tell us, some of the implications of fibroids in women, because some people don't realize how serious it can be. And sometimes your gynecologist will say, oh, you just have a few small fibroids, don't worry about it.
Well, fibroids are the most common pelvic tumor seen in women. And as you mentioned, it's very common, but it is particularly common in women of color. 80% of African American women have these benign tumors. So they're not cancerous. That's good. They're benign. But as you mentioned, for some women, it causes a lot of misery.
And so why is it important that people, get seen and treated for fibroids before, they get to the point of needing a hysterectomy?
Well, it's, as you mentioned, hysterectomy is an option for some women with fibroids, but it's our mission at the Atlanta Fibroid Center to treat women without any surgery whatsoever. So there are a number of things that we can do short of surgery, which gives them what I call the triple crown. It treats the fibroid symptoms very effectively. So that's good. That's the reason why they come in and see us. Second, they avoid the risks and long recovery of an operation. And third, with respect to hysterectomy, you get to keep all your parts, not lose them. Because one of the things that is not talked about very often is what happens to women when they lose their uterus. Yes, it does take care of your fibroid problem, but it opens up other doors that a lot of women don't realize they open, and they don't like the fact that the cure sometimes is worse than the disease.
Wow. And can you share like some of those implications that a
Sure.
hysterectomy can cause that people are not aware of or they may not know?
Yeah, hysterectomy, well, just to give some numbers on hysterectomy, hysterectomy is the second most common surgery done in the United States. That can be surprising to a lot of people, because it surprised me when I learned about it, because half the population doesn't even have a uterus, men. So it's the second most common surgery we do in the United States, and the most common reason why we do hysterectomy is not for cancer, which is appropriate. If you have uterine cancer, obviously hysterectomy is the appropriate treatment, but the most common reason by far is these benign fibroids. And the average age of hysterectomy in this country is less than 40. And I've seen way too many women less than 30 have already lost their uterus. I spoke at Tuskegee University in front of several hundred young Black women, and 3 of them came up to me in tears after my talk on UFE and on how to treat fibroids non-surgically. They had all had hysterectomies. They were less than 30, and none of them wanted it, but they were suffering so badly, and they weren't given any other option. So that's probably the most important part of this whole talk tonight, is that no matter what your gynecologist tells you, you do not need to do a hysterectomy for fibroids. There are outstanding non-surgical alternatives, particularly one called uterine fibroid embolization, or UFE.
And someone asked, what causes fibroids exactly?
Well, I wish we knew. Nobody knows where fibroids come from, but once they arrive on the scene, they grow with estrogen. That's why they can grow very rapidly during a woman when she gets pregnant, and why for most women, they're not an issue any longer once they go into menopause.
Gotcha. And what are some of the symptoms women experience when they do have fibroids?
Well, they can experience a number of symptoms, but the big 3 are: 1, heavy menstrual bleeding. It's the most common reason why women have heavy periods, and it's often how they present to my office as the number 1 symptom. They can also have pelvic pain. These tumors are hard and firm. They're like rocks, and they press on things. So they can press on pelvic nerves to cause pain in the pelvic region. If they're in the back of the uterus, they can press on the nerves that innervate the buttock and the hips and down the legs. So they can get sciatica, just like people that throw out their back and get a herniated disc of their back. So a number of patients have already undergone workups for other things and not realizing the fibroids are the culprit. So heavy bleeding, pelvic pain, and then the third is increased urinary frequency and waking up at night to urinate, because again, these fibroids are rock hard, and if they're in the front of the uterus, the bladder sits right in front of the uterus, and that these fibroids will act like a paperweight and compress the bladder, not allowing it to fill appropriately, so they have to urinate more frequently and wake up at night to urinate.
Gotcha. And I have another question that came in for you. Can the size of fibroids decrease on their own, or is that not typical?
Well, they can on their own, and there are some things, that can decrease the growth of a fibroid. Usually it's not something dramatic, but fibroids grow rapidly during pregnancy, and as soon as a woman delivers, those fibroids will start to shrink from the lack of the surge of estrogen of pregnancy. They never go back to where they were to begin with at the start of pregnancy, but they do come down a bit. They will also change if you can change your diet. While we don't know where fibroids come from, as I mentioned, estrogen is the fuel. And so there are things you can do to kind of limit exogenous estrogen. Estrogen is produced in the ovaries, and we're exposed to estrogen in the food and the water. So it's impossible to avoid estrogen, but there are things that we can do to try to limit extra estrogen, if you will. So trying to be as close to your ideal body weight, because estrogen is stored and produced in body fat. And so if you can exercise and be as close to your ideal body weight, that's helpful. Eating colored fruits and vegetables, they have flavonoids in them, which have an enzyme that blocks estrogen. There are certain hormone-rich foods. As I mentioned, there's hormones pervasive in the food and water, but certain foods like red meat, non-organic chicken, and dairy, those are kind of the hormone offenders, if you will. And if you can kind of limit or try to work around, like for dairy, if you like cow milk, you could try nut milk, or chicken, you can do organic chicken rather than non-organic chicken. Red meat's a little harder. Some people substitute soy, although soy is kind of a mixed bag, because some soys have plant-derived estrogen, phytoestrogens in them. So, you try to do as best you can. And the other big item is vitamin D. Vitamin D is the most powerful anti-fibroid growth hormone. It's really a hormone, not a vitamin, technically. And it can really retard fibroid growth. And it's one of the reasons why African-American women disproportionately suffer with fibroids. Only 10% of women of color have adequate vitamin D. They also tend to have more body fat than other racial groups. Genetically, it runs stronger in their family. So there are multiple factors here, but that's one of the reasons why African-American women get these fibroid tumors more than other racial groups.
Wow. So much information. I feel like I learn something new every time I speak to you, and I've been speaking to you for years now. I so appreciate that you are leading the charge to educate us on the options so that women do not get unnecessary hysterectomies. It's so important. So if you have anything else you want to add for those who are watching as it relates to how they can connect with you, or when exactly they should book a consultation with you.
Well, if you're suffering with heavy periods, pelvic pain, urinary frequency, and you feel it's due to fibroids, then we'd be happy to see them. Usually they go to their gynecologist. The gynecologist may have made the diagnosis of fibroids based on an office ultrasound. And then they will, depending on the symptoms and severity, will offer treatment alternatives. Usually the first option, the first line of treatment is often, ironically, birth control pills. Because if you're bleeding heavily, the birth control will tend to lighten flow. The problem is, as we mentioned, birth control has estrogen in it. And so in the background, it's like pouring gas on these fibroids. And so they will grow more rapidly than they otherwise would. And eventually the birth control will stop working. And then typically the gynecologist will say, well, we tried this less invasive approach. Now you need surgery. And the surgery comes in two basic flavors. And it depends entirely on a woman's desire for fertility. So if she's interested in children, they'll offer a myomectomy. which is surgically cutting into the woman, cutting into her uterus, and taking some of the fibroids out. And that's the real key to myomectomy, is that they never get them all out. And lots of times they leave as many fibroids behind as they take out. And so while a woman will get some relief for a short period of time, most women need something again within 5 years. It's an 11% recurrence rate with myomectomy. If they're not interested in fertility, they go right to hysterectomy. And while, as I say, that does take care of your fibroid problem, losing your uterus has consequences for women. It can affect them psychologically, like a man being castrated. It can affect them sexually. There's a lot of sexual dysfunction, loss of libido, loss of orgasm. There's urinary leaking. You take this big fibroid-filled uterus, which is described as a certain size pregnancy, you remove it out of the pelvis, and you weaken the pelvic floor muscles, and now these women leak urine. And if you don't believe me, go to any Publix or Kroger or Walgreens or anywhere they sell adult diapers. And who you should see on that package is my dad, or someone like my dad. He's 95. You won't see somebody like that. You'll see someone who looks like you, attractive, young, 35, maybe 40, African-American woman on the cover. Now, you know, Depends is New York City at Madison Avenue marketing. They know exactly who their target is. It's not my dad. It's a 35 to 40-year-old African-American woman. Why? That's the average age of a hysterectomy in this country. So they know exactly who they're targeting. There's a lot of bone loss after hysterectomy. And we're more active than the previous generations. There's no reason whatsoever to do a hysterectomy for benign disease. I mean, think about it. Why are we essentially amputating young Black women for benign tumors? It's outrageous. We have the solution. It's called Uterine Fibroid Embolization, UFE. It's one of the biggest medical breakthroughs that likely you'll never hear about. Gynecologists all know about the procedure, but they're surgeons, and surgeons like to operate. And even though women are entitled to know all their options, not just the surgical ones, for the most part, they'll only hear about surgery. And that's a shame, because they're entitled to know all the options to make the best informed decision. And so you almost have to know about UFE. It's completely outpatient, non-surgical. It takes me 30 minutes to perform. It's a 30-minute procedure, and then after the procedure, there's a brief recovery of several hours in our center, and patients will go home with a Band-Aid and their uterus. It's a tremendous procedure. I've been doing it here in Atlanta for 25 years. It's available throughout the country, but we're known for this. In fact, supposedly I have the largest UFE experience nationwide, and people will travel great distances to see us at the Atlanta Fibroid Center. But the bottom line is you can get this procedure throughout the country, and women should know about this procedure without having to go on the internet. Their doctors should tell them about UFE and tell them also about surgery, and let them make up their own minds whether they want a non-surgical outpatient procedure or they want surgery.
Absolutely. And I definitely referred a friend who traveled from North Carolina to see you, and she was very happy with the results. She had not heard of UFE prior to me working with you years ago. And I'm like, hey, you need to check this out, because yeah, I think this is a way better option. And she was definitely pleased. So if you're watching, please share this broadcast out with your friends, with your aunties, with your nieces, because they need to know their options, and they need to connect with Dr. Lipman should they have issues with fibroids. And it's the Atlanta Fibroid Center. What is the website that they can visit to learn more?
The website is atlii.com. atlii.com, and we have an Instagram page. It's dr, like doctor, underscore my last name. So it's dr underscore Lipman. And we have a YouTube channel, Atlanta Fibroid Center, with over 150 videos on fibroids, on the UFE procedure. One of the things that people aren't aware of is that you can have children after UFE. So there are a lot of myths about UFE. Well, I went to my doctor and he said my fibroids were too big, or I had too many fibroids. Never too big, never too many. Yes, you can have children. We've had numerous children after UFE our births are typically full term and vaginal, whereas if you have a myomectomy, the surgical alternative, you're going to get a C-section. They won't let you have a vaginal birth. It's covered, the UFE procedure is covered by every major insurance carrier. That's really important. A lot of times people say, well, I thought it was something new and it wasn't covered by insurance. No, we've been doing this for a long time. All the major carriers cover it, including Medicare and Medicaid. And so that's, insurance should not be an issue as long as you have insurance. Now, I know there are some people that don't have the luxury of having insurance. That's a different matter, but all insurances cover UFE.
Good to know. Good to know. So again, ladies, definitely check out the Atlanta Fibroid Center. The website is atlii.com. Follow Dr._Lipman on Instagram and share this broadcast out with your friends, with your aunts, with your moms, because you never know who isn't educated and they need to know what their options are. And they need to know that there's a way better option than a hysterectomy. We have to protect our use, right? Because we definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important, and we're trying to get this word out nationally. In fact, on the 27th of this month, we'll be speaking with Damon John from Shark Tank, and he's been very involved in trying to help us, spread this message. It's just overdue. It's, this is something that people need to know about, and it's way overdue. And we're grateful for the celebrities that have come through, like Cynthia Bailey and Portia Williams from Real Housewives, Jovita Moore here in Atlanta, who is a dear friend, and she passed away from a different medical condition, but she was also very helpful in getting this word out. And, as I say, this is time now. I mean, there's no more excuses. Everybody needs to know about it. It's one of the biggest medical breakthroughs for women. And everyone is entitled to know about UFE, and hopefully soon everyone will.